here 30 years ago for the March on Washington, from Texas across to Florida up to Virginia, we couldn't use a single public toilet. We could not use a single hotel. We couldn't drink water from a single fountain. We did not have the right to vote. We didn't have a congressional black caucus. We didn't have 400 black mayors. We did not have the capacity to even think about foreign affairs, dealing in private survival. But just like when David knocked down Goliath, he couldn't go and party because Goliath wasn't no eunuch, he had some babies. And you knock down Jim Crow and you got Jim Crow Esquire. The giants keep coming. And so do not end up in a way you say, well, what can we do? Well, we in fact, the laws that trapped South Africa of apartheid in 1948 came from here, from the 1896 laws. What Mandela is trying to do now is what we achieved in 1965. The fact is, we are winning and our struggling has not been in vain, but there are some different options. For example, when Dr. King would make the case that we just end racism by law and get inside the plant gate with an education, we can grow. That was a period of economic growth. Now we get inside the plant and the plant is closed. There's a very different context in which we operate. Zero economic growth among the industrial nations of the world is a factor in this. The economic downturn cannot be ignored. Lastly, we beat legislation with Jim Crow, but now Jim Crow Esquire regulation. The giants keep coming. And I would say lastly, Aristide is on his way back to Haiti because of us. Mandela got out of jail because of us. We're going to bring that matter to a resolution in Nigeria because of us. And now there will be an urban policy because we will not back down. So in the face of all of these challenges, do not assume that our struggles have been in vain and not productive.
I'll take some brief comments from Minister Farrakhan and Representative Waters and then go to your questions.
The scripture teaches, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. And it is ignorance that is the worst enemy of the rise of our people to fulfill our destiny. That ignorance is fed on by corrupt leadership. Now, the scripture again says, woe to the shepherds who feed themselves and not the flock. Should not the shepherds feed the flock? Most of our leaders are handpicked by the very enemy that we're trying to get free from. It's all right for us to say we have a voting rights bill and a public accommodations bill, and all of us, including myself, have benefited from those bills. But to get a public accommodations bill and a voting rights bill and then close black hotels because we sleep in white ones, or close black establishments so that we can spend our money with our oppressor is not winning. Reverend Jackson, I submit. Wait. On one hand, we are winning because every one of these brilliant congresspersons, they represent us. They are brilliant men and women. These are brilliant people in front of us. But what good does it do to have a brilliant head not connected to a black body?
Hello family, it's African Esquire and I'm here with a new video. So apparently, according to CNN, black men are succeeding in America. And this is an article title that came out on July 3rd, and basically the claim in the article is that we should be optimistic for black men because they're really doing better than what they seem. I wanted to read through this article and just give my overall thought and opinions on these claims that CNN is making, and really center the conversation on the fact that the system of white supremacy tries so hard to convince us that everything is fine even when we know that everything is not fine. And in this instance, it's trying to convince us that black men are doing great in America, although we know black men are doing horribly in America. So I'm going to just read through a couple of relevant parts of the article, and as we go through, I'll give my thoughts on different passages and also give my overall thoughts at the end. So in recent years, much of the racial news in America has been sobering, if not depressing. Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Ferguson, Baltimore, and Charlottesville. While many public commentators like Ta-Nehisi Coates have underlined the enduring character of racism in America and the ways in which America's racial divide has exacted a particular kind of toll on black men and boys, there is today unheralded good news about African American men. Now it says, despite a portrayal of race relations that often highlight the negative, especially regarding black men, the truth is that most black men will not be incarcerated, are not employed, and are not poor, even if black men are more likely than other men to experience these same outcomes. I want to read that again because just listen to how ridiculous that sounds. Despite the fact that black men are more likely to be poor, more likely to be incarcerated, and more likely to be unemployed, we should be happy because the truth is that most black men will not be incarcerated, unemployed, or poor. That makes no sense. Like if most black men are most likely than everyone, how is it optimistic to say, well, at least not all of them are, at least not most of them are, at least not more than 50% of them are? I mean, it's just such a weird claim. How would you claim, oh well, you know, you're facing genocide, but most of you don't have to deal with that? Well, even the black men who don't necessarily have to deal with unemployment or deal with poverty or deal with incarceration, there are ripple effects throughout the black community that need to be acknowledged. Even if it's a small group of people who are incarcerated, understand that black man who's incarcerated has kids, he has a son, a daughter, he might have a wife, girlfriend, he has a mother, a family who's going to be affected by the fact that this person is removed from that family, removed from that community. The fact that you have black men who are poor, well, guess what? Whenever, as Marcus Garvey said, a hungry man is no respecter of your society. So when you have a bunch of hungry people walking around, and I live in the same community as these poor people, who do you think is going to be the victim more than likely of these people who have no regard for the society? Who do you think they're going to rob more than likely? Who do you think is going to be more at danger of the fact that we are more impoverished? So to tell us that, well, guess what? Most black men are not going to face this, even though they're more likely to, well, that's not a comfort to us at all, because even if they're not in that category, we're still going to be facing some type of effect, ripple effect of this inside of our communities. Now, the article goes on to say, in fact, millions of black men are flourishing in America today. All report Black Men Making It in America spotlights two pieces of particular good news about the economic well-being of black men. First, the share of black men in poverty has fell from 41% in 1960 to 18% today. Second, and most importantly, the share of black men in the middle class or upper class as measured by their family income has risen from 38% in the 1960 to 57% today. In other words, about 1 in 2 black men in America have reached the middle class or higher. So we should notice that they leave out some vital statistics in this analysis, and they're going to talk about these statistics later, but to even bring up the fact that, okay, well, the percentage of black men in the middle class has actually increased, without talking about the fact that even if it's increased, the increase is nothing compared to the way that it's increased for white Americans, for Asian Americans. If it's not all around just black men who are benefiting from this. And if black men are only benefiting from this a little bit compared to everyone else, then how is this something to be celebrating? The other thing is, we have to realize they left out some very key issues when they were looking at the statistics. So they said, well, okay, more black men are the middle class, more black men have jobs and whatnot, but they left out the fact that most black men now, compared to back in the 60s, don't own a business. In fact, that's one of the trade-offs of integration, is that our communities now are lacking in entrepreneurship. Although it might have been it might have been tough living inside of a segregated society, the fact is, economically, our communities were better back whenever segregation was instilled in America. They also left out the home ownership. Now, home ownership and entrepreneurship, why is it essential that these two statistics be mentioned in order to have a full picture of what's going on? Because you can't really talk about power if you're just talking about jobs, if you're just talking about entering the middle class. Power means being able to determine your own destiny. And if you don't own businesses in your community, and you don't even own property in your community, then you are powerless people. So the property ownership rates and the entrepreneurship rates are way worse than it was. Yet we're supposed to be happy about the fact that, hey, at least it, is not that bad as far as us entering the middle class. So these are half-painted pictures that we're being given in order to make us optimistic about our state right now in America. Now, the article goes on to say, the good news is important and should be widely disseminated because it might help reduce prejudicial views of black men in society at large and negative portrayals of black men in media. It should also engender most of all African Americans, particularly young black males. I don't understand the logic in this. So the fact that black men are more in the middle class right now than they were in the 1960s is supposed to somehow make the society less racist or make the society less discriminatory against black men. I mean, at this point, we've had a black president, a half black president, we have black judges, we have black councilwomen, black congressmen, congresswomen, we have black people almost in every single pocket of society. And if you're still racist, or you still have prejudicial views of black boys, black men being predators or whatever, now knowing that, well, hey, more black men are in the middle class, so therefore you shouldn't be prejudicial anymore. A lot of those same middle class black men are also going to face the same stereotyping, even though some black men will straight up assimilate into white society. There will be nothing about them except for their skin that you can tell is black, and they'll still get treated like every single one of us. So the fact that we're supposed to feel good and calm knowing that the society now knows that there's more of us in the middle class, it just doesn't make sense to even make that analysis. Also, I thought there was something interesting about this. So Marcus Garvey had a analysis on why is it that the average or the mainstream white person hates seeing black people when they are in poverty and hates seeing them, the state that they are in, the state that we are in. And his thoughts were, subconsciously, when they see us and they see the state that we are in, it reminds them of how we got in this state. So how we got in this state, we didn't one day just end up in poverty and end up in these communities and end up disenfranchised. It was actually something that was systemic, and it was also something that was intentional, done by white people who took us from our original land and brought us here and enslaved us. So as long as we're doing bad and suffering from the effects of slavery, but not just slavery, but the systems that exist today of white supremacy, then that's always a reminder to the white guilt complex that they are the ones that put us in the state that we are in today. So the idea that, well, they hate you because, you just look a certain way, or you remind them of criminality or something like that. I think really the deep-seated hate comes from the fact that they want, number one, they know that we are in this condition that we are in because of their acts, but number two, they know that if they stop doing these heinous acts, that they will be at a disadvantage because they will lose their position in the society. And so they feel like they have to justify their position in the society, and although morally it's obviously compromising, they have to justify it in order to feel good and feel okay with living in the system. So in order to justify it, they end up hating us, because the best thing to do is to blame the victim, blame the people who suffered, because if you don't blame the victim, then you're going to have to blame yourself. So going on, the article says, adding to the chances of black men achieving middle class and higher status is the U.S. military. We found that serving in the military was associated with a 72% increase in the odds that black men made it into the middle class or higher as 50-something-year-old black men. So I want to repeat this. They're saying that we should feel happy that black men are in the military, because in their 50s, they're more than likely to enter the middle class. Now, I want to back up. What is this crazy obsession with the middle class? Because really, we should know by now that being in the middle class does not mean anything as far as power, does not mean anything as far as self-determination, and it certainly does not mean anything about controlling your own destiny. You could be in the middle class, but more than likely, you're going to be serving inside of a white corporation who the top people, the upper class, the higher upper class, none of them look like you. So the idea that we should be content with the middle class, to me, is just insulting, because if why shouldn't we want to be in the highest class? If anything, why is the middle class enough? Why do we feel like this is an accomplishment when the mass of our community does not come with us? We can only have a couple of people in the middle class, but the fact is that if all of us are not with us, then you're not really benefiting as a collective. So the idea that we should be happy to be in America's middle class doesn't make sense to me. Now, the idea that we should celebrate the military, let's understand something very particular about the military. There are a lot of African Americans in the military. There's a lot of Africans from all over the diaspora in the military, honestly, because it's an economic opportunity. If you don't have access to go to college, if you don't have access to a job, what are you going to do with yourself? And a lot of people, they have to make the decision, okay, am I going to sit around the neighborhood and just become like everyone else, or am I going to do something to try to get some economic livelihood? And the military becomes the option. I've realized through knowing people in the military, a lot of them are not particularly patriotic or crazy about this being in the military or this military complex that we have in America. A lot of them are not crazy about that. But the fact is, if you don't have any other choice, then what are you going to do? So a lot of people enter the military not because they want to, not because they feel strongly about any type of political thing, but they enter the military out of economic duress. So if we're entering the military out of economic duress or almost force, why are we celebrating the fact that the poor and disenfranchised people have to go potentially lose their life for all of these wars? Not one of them, to me, is justifiable. Why is that the celebration? Moreover, why is it that the people on the top, why is this military not celebrated for their children? Why are their children not being sent to risk their lives for this country? I love that the people who are most emphatic about, oh, we love this country, blah, 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 we love the military. Well, send your children instead of us sending our children, if that's the case, because our children are the ones dying, and they're in that place in the first place because they were shut out of economic opportunities. And these children, they go to these wars. You have a lot of wars happening in Africa, like the brother that was killed in Niger, and they're fighting these imperialist wars that they have to obey commands, and so they're put in a position where they're oppressing people who look just like them, and they're doing it again out of lack of economic opportunity, out of economic duress, not being able to access money, but also just not being able to access self-determination. And the military should not be celebrated for this. Now, it goes on to say, by providing stable work, good health care, housing, and opportunities for advancement, by championing virtues of duty, responsibility, loyalty, perseverance, and by pushing racial integration, the U.S. military has served as an important route into the middle class. So let's back up. It says by providing stable work, good health care, housing, opportunities for advancement. Everyone knows that the second that you get out of the military, those things are no longer being given to you. In fact, if you look around, most of these people who you see on the streets begging, a lot of them are veterans. veterans are very shut out once they're no longer active. That's basically what you're going to, because the fact is they'll pay for your health care, and they don't really pay that much to the military, first of all, but they'll pay you, a decent amount for your health care, for your housing, and all that stuff. But the second that you leave them, you are out on your own. I think that more people have suffered from that and feeling that cushion of, okay, the military is going to take care of me, just to find out that the military didn't take care of you. I think more people have suffered from that than have actually gained from that, because once the rug is pulled out under you and you're in a situation where you have to fend for yourself, when you thought that the government who promised you all these things was going to come through for you, but they didn't, that's completely going to throw you off as far as what your plan is. Now, the championing virtues such as duty, responsibility, loyalty, perseverance, basically indoctrination. So we should be celebrating the U.S. military because of the attempt, and I honestly don't think being in the military means you're going to be indoctrinated. You're more than likely to be indoctrinated when you're in elementary school, or you're just in school period, the grade schools. But a lot of times, by the time you're that age of military, you're thinking what you think. The indoctrination is not going to have as strong as an effect as when you are a child. Nonetheless, you have to have a certain level of indoctrination, or else you can't be in the military. So there's stuff. They're celebrating the fact that you were taught, they said, virtues such as duty, responsibility, loyal, perseverance. Nothing about justice, nothing about humanity. I mean, that's one thing I can't stand, is when I hear people talk about military operations and they talk about the other side as though they're just, some people, the Iraq war, oh, these are just some casualties from their side. But these are people, and we have to understand, before you are an American, you are a person, you are a human being. You're a child of God before you are anything else. So if you're that, number one, then why don't you acknowledge the same humanity in other people? Why would you be willing to look at them as something other than you, just because you happen to be born here and they happen to be born there? The drone attacks, it kills me how just nonchalant people were about the fact that, the first black president that everyone celebrated was allowing these drone attacks to happen in the Middle East and Africa, and many civilians were killed in these attacks. Could you imagine another government sending drones over to your neighborhood, or just anywhere in America really, and ordering that because one person might be in the area who is suspected of something, because of that they're just going to shoot a freaking big drone, gunshot into the whole neighborhood and kill dozens of people for that one person? And could you imagine that being okay in this country? Because that's what's okay according to the United States military. That's what's okay in the Middle East, and that's what's okay in Africa. So the lack of humanity, there was a wedding that was shot up by a drone, I remember, when Obama was president. The lack of humanity, the lack of empathy, that's what you have to have, especially if you're doing these operations. If you're the one doing these drone attacks, you have to have a lack of empathy. You have to have a lack of humanity. And to me, that's really the biggest problem with American patriotism, is that it reinforces this idea that because you happen to be born, again, this is a total coincidence to me, like, God meant it to happen, but God meant, what does it have to do with, there's nothing significant that made you be born here as opposed to someone who's born in Africa, someone who's born in the Middle East. And the fact that you happen to be born in the United States of America means that you no longer can identify with other people's humanity. Your humanity is what is most valued and what should be most cherished, and you shouldn't care about other people losing their lives. You should be American before you're a human being. That's really what is ingrained into the military indoctrination. Now, the article goes on to say, moreover, the U.S. government is also known for its marriage-oriented culture. The U.S. military is known for that. And we found that black men who served in the military as young men were much more likely to be married later, at ages 29 to 37, compared to their peers who did not serve. The marriage advantage played a role in boosting their later odds of success. I didn't get where they were going with this. If you don't know, a lot of people do get married in the military a lot sooner than a lot of people would. A big reason for that is economic issues, economic duress. When you are given a higher income for having a wife and the kids and everything, that's just something that makes sense, especially if you have a long-term girlfriend or something. Hey, we can get more money if we just get married. If you have kids, it just makes more sense. The idea that it's that culture is what's going to make you succeed in this country, it doesn't make sense to me outside of understanding that a lot of times people are doing these things for an economic advantage, and honestly, a lot of these marriages don't really last out like that. So it goes on to say, of course, the story of our report tells is not all rose-colored. So here we go with the truth. Black men are significantly less likely to make it into middle and upper class than their white and Asian American peers. The odds of black men in their 50s making it to the middle class were about 60% lower for those who were charged with a crime as a young adult. And of course, because if you go to prison, then you are almost completely locked out of any economic opportunities unless someone comes around and has sympathy on you, because the second that they have that record, they're going to disqualify you. All right, so here's some observations I just wanted to make about this article. So the article is making the argument that we should measure ourselves based on what we have gotten, and not making the argument that we should be measuring ourselves by what we are owed, because we're owed a lot more than what we've gotten. Yeah, okay, you've been in the middle class, but what about housing? What about what about education? Black men are one of the lowest educated groups. What about just respect? What about life? What about healthcare? What about these things that you are owed, especially having been the people who were used to build this country into the empire that it is? The other thing is, as an internationalist or black Pan-Africanist perspective, not only are we owed things being here by the transatlantic slave trade, if that's why you're here, but even the sheer amount of capital that has been exploited out of Africa, the sheer amount of goods, of natural resources that this country has built itself on, you were owed just because of that. So when we understand that these things, we're more likely to be in the middle class, these things really mean nothing as opposed to what you're owed. You're owed to be way more than that. Could you imagine the system, what it would be if, number one, if we weren't brought here to be enslaved, but number two, if Africa was able and allowed to fully develop the natural resources that it has, if it was able to compete on fair grounds. To celebrate being in the middle class, you don't know how much more of a higher position you would be in. If you were actually able to access your natural resources. And it's funny, there's a lot of rich Saudi princes in Saudi Arabia because they have access to their oil, their natural resources. So just imagine how much more Africa, the most minerally rich continent on the face of the earth, they have access to the resources, and because they don't have access to the resources, because we will never know what it could be like until we get access to our resources, what world we would live in. So that's what we're owed. We're owed being able to have self-determination. We're owed to be able to control our resources and to actually do what other people have been allowed to do, to be able to develop ourselves. That's not what we're given. We're given these token gains. We're given these symbolic gestures. You get to be in the middle class. Well, I get to be in the middle class in a whole system that is built on oppressing my people or built on taking from my people. How meaningful is that? Like, what's the end here? Oh, okay, well, when I die, I get to have said, hey, I got to be in the middle class, while most of my people have died in poverty, where we all really have the resources to totally change the narrative of how things are going. Just another observation, I found it really interesting that they only said black men are doing great in America. I think part of the reason for that is really the feminist movement. If you don't know, the black feminist movement is very strong, especially on Twitter, on different social media platforms. And I could just imagine if the article was black women are successful in America, they would have raised hell about that. I also think that this might be trying to change the narrative. We should know that, you know, I'm personally of the opinion that black men and black women, we both are equally in this together. There's not any separation as far as how one group is doing. There's not one group that's elevated, or there's not one group that's the as they said, the white supremacists of the black race. There's no group that has the ability to oppress the other between black men and black women. To me, we are right there with each other. At the same time, we have different struggles just by way of our different genders or different sexes. One of the issues with black men, of course, is you're less hired, you're more likely to be targeted by the police, you're more likely to just be economically shut out. And these are things that are byproducts of the image of black men as being not just criminal, but being basically beast-like, you know, it's being something that has to be tamed, being something to be afraid of, being something that intimidates you. You don't want someone that's going to be too assertive. You don't want one that's going to make you feel docile. So this has been very linked to the reason why black women a lot of times were given opportunities inside of white companies that black men were not given. So it's interesting that they chose the narrative that black men are successful. I don't think they would have dared to say that about black women, given the strong presence of black feminism online. But I also think that this might be an attempt to reinforce the idea that we shouldn't be championing both black men and black women. We should only be championing black women, because we should not be championing black men. They're doing great in America. It's weird that they completely left out the statistics about black women. I don't understand what would make them want to just do this article about black men. You would want a full picture of black women, because most black men are married to black women. Most black men live with black women. Most black men are born from black women. So our histories are the statistics about our social well-being, they're all connected. So how do you completely leave that out? How are black women doing with the middle class? I happen to know that they're doing better than black men, but it's just funny that they completely left that element out of this article. And like I said, I think there's an agenda to it in order to say that, hey, you know, we shouldn't be focused on black men anymore. But that's basically my thoughts about the article. I really think that it's just an attempt to soften us, basically, or make us feel optimistic. You know, this blind optimism is what has, you know, this country is fed on, as far as leaving us to think, oh well, it's just a little while longer, or we're almost there, we're going to be there in a little bit, we're winning. As I put in the video to start off this whole thing, you know, Jesse Jackson said, hey, we're winning, we have this, we have that, we can eat at lunch counters, we can do this, we can do that. The idea is to put us in this trance, to keep us thinking that we're just around the corner for something better, to have us thinking that our livelihood, our economic well-being is in this country, and not in our homeland being liberated, not in our different destinations, our different countries, different islands being liberated, our people throughout the diaspora being liberated. We're supposed to put all of our stock in the idea that, hey, I can be in the middle class, and not in the idea of having power and self-determination over your own communities, not just locally but internationally. So understand the agenda. You know, I noticed that a lot of times, this is just an observation, that online I notice people post articles of, this is the first black valedictorian of this school, or this is the first black person who's an engineering blah 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 student in this school. And while I celebrate all of those people accomplishing something, I always wonder, you know, what's the agenda? Are you trying to convince yourself that we're not trash? Because you should know that we're not trash. I mean, when it comes to math and everything, we invented this math that's being used today. We invented so much of the science that is being used today. So what's the confusion? But I notice people post these articles a lot, and to me, sometimes I do think it's more of a self-esteem boost, because we start to believe that we're not in these circles. And, you know, it's, by all means, I'm not saying it's not great to have us in these multiple circles, and hopefully these people don't just stay the first black whatever, and they come back into the community and they give something to the community, and we can build off of their talents and their skills and their specializations. But the battle isn't won at being the first black, this, to that, and the third. The battle is won when that same black person can come back and do something that will change the condition that the rest of us have to live in. So just to say, you know, these gains, these momentary gains, let's think about more meaningful things, not think about trivial things such as just being in the middle class and, you know, being able to say that, hey, you know, we're doing somewhat better, and I would argue that we're not, but we're doing better than what we were, so therefore, you know, everything is one and we're fine. So that's all I have about this article. I would love to hear your thoughts, and I will see you on another video.